So if you know me, you know that one of my favorite video game series is Devil May Cry. Hell, there's a reason that it's the primary thing that's posted around on this channel. However, in getting ready to start retrospectively analyzing video games, I figured I would guide myself in with my favorite action game series. The amazing, the absolutely stunningly stylish.
Let's rock, baby.
So let's start things off with how I got into this series, because it'll play a part later on in the video. You see, how I got into this series, let's say it was early 2020. I was watching a lot of video game retrospective content, stuff by Some Call Me Johnny, The Angry Video Game Nerd, Jay's Reviews, Devil Joe, and a buttload of other channels that are way better than mine. And it was in watching all of this content that I stumbled across Jay's Reviews review of the HD version of Sonic Unleashed, and Sonic Unleashed being one of my favorite games of all time. Correction, my favorite game of all time. I clicked on it, and I was watching it, and he was discussing the Werehog. And I really like the Werehog's combat. But at the time, I had never played a Metal Gear Rising, I didn't know what a Bayonetta was, and I certainly didn't know what Devil May Cry or God of War were. So, I was watching him talk about the Werehog, and he was explaining it in comparison to Devil May Cry. And this being a series that I had never heard of, but it looked interesting, so I decided to put it in my backlog of games that I was going to try someday when I had money to buy consoles. And that was where my interest in Devil May Cry started. Anyway, the following week I was talking with my father about video games, because that's something that him and I can talk about. And I guess I offhandedly and very briefly mentioned Devil May Cry, in which he got very excited and told me that he owned the first and second game. It was the third game, but he thinks the third game is the second game. And this pops up in conversation so much that I don't even bother to correct him, but it's funny. Anyway, so that following week when I'm at his house, he busts out his old PS2 and a copy of Devil May Cry. And I start playing the castle area, and I'm thoroughly confused because what the fuck is this shit? The jump button's on triangle, attack is on square, the guns are on circle, like there's this weird taunt button and the lock-on's all goofy. What is this game? And not to mention, this castle area genuinely scared me. This didn't look like anything I had seen from the Jay's review footage that he briefly showed in comparison to the Werehog. I was super confused and a little bit scared because I'm a level with you. I had a super low threshold for things that even slightly scared me or spooked me out at the time. So yeah, that shit was confusing and it's scary. So I dropped Devil May Cry. And the next day, I started playing Devil May Cry 3. And I got my ass royally handed to me. I'm talking on a silver fucking platter with extra jiggle physics, okay? Anyway, I was so dog water at this game, I didn't understand how the upgrade system worked, I didn't understand how the style system worked, I didn't understand how to buy the double jump or any of the extended moves. I was a stupid fucking kid, okay? Anyway, so I was playing the game the first time around with Gunslinger and Rebellion and Agni and Rudra for like pretty much the entire game because I was like, ooh, cool sword. And I was so confused, and I got to like mission 13 or 14 where you have to like switch the doors and shit. And that was such a brain puzzler for me that I literally dropped the game and started playing Sonic Unleashed on the PS3. And I dropped Devil May Cry for, I want to say, a couple years. I think it was late 2023 that I went and I got Resident Evil 5 for my newly received Xbox 360. One of my friends had given me their old Xbox 360 because they had gotten an Xbox Series X. So I was playing new games, and I was trying Resident Evil. My first game in the series was Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube. And I picked up Resident Evil 5 because I loved Resident Evil 4 so much. And on the way out, the way up to the cashier, I saw the Devil May Cry HD collection for the I own it on both PlayStation 4 and Xbox 360. I saw it for the Xbox 360. And my mom said I could pick up a second game because she had some extra cash. So I went home that day with a copy of Resident Evil 5 and the Devil May Cry HD collection. And I played through Resident Evil 5, and I thought it to be quite underwhelming compared to Resident Evil 4, not knowing that you were supposed to play the game with a second person, but I'll get to that in the Resident Evil retrospective. Anyway, I dropped Resident Evil 5, and I jumped back in on Devil May Cry 3, because that was the one I was familiar with. And oh my god, I loved Devil May Cry 3. Devil May Cry 3 was so good. I played that 6 times, back to back, got all the styles maxed out, got everything, literally 100% of the game. And I had such a fun time with it that I literally had to force myself to go and play Devil May Cry 1. And that is where this video picks up. Now, I will be interspersing what my first experience with Devil May Cry 1 was like throughout the video, in little bits and pieces here and there. But for now, all you have to know is that I didn't really like Devil May Cry 1 on my first playthrough. I thought it was really difficult. I thought it was kind of weird compared to 3. And to be honest, I didn't start liking Devil May Cry 1 until a few of my recent playthroughs, actually. Not to say that I hated it, I just thought it was very abstract compared to the rest of the series. But without further ado, let's get into actually reviewing the video game. Approximately 2 millennia ago, an evil demon king launches an all-out attack on the human world. And by his right-hand side, Sparta. No, not this Sparta.
This is Sparta!
This Sparta. This is a high-ranking demon warrior, and a pretty cool-looking one at that. Now, it is during this all-out attack that he wakes up to justice and sees the error of his ways, picking his sword up and turning it against his own kind. He slaughters every demon in his path until he can get to Mundus, and he slaughters him too. And then he leaves the demon world behind, permanently shutting the portal between the human world and the demon world, and making it so all humans can prosper and live freely. Now it is in the human world that he meets a woman named Ava, and together they bear 2 children, Dante and Virgil. Now this is where our story picks up. So after that introduction cutscene, we flash forward 20 years into the future, as we get a shot of a mysterious woman falling from the sky. As she lands, the camera slowly pans around, very dramatically might I add, and reveals a shop. That shop's name being Devil May Cry. This is where we are introduced to our protagonist, Dante. And we get this very PS2, early 2000s introduction.
Devil May Cry. Sorry, we closed at 9. Again, no password. I can't seem to get any real business. Whoa, slow down, babe. Well, what do we have here? Nature calls? It's in the back.
So, you must be the handyman who'll take any dirty job. Am I correct?
Almost. I only take special jobs, if you know what I mean.
You're the man who lost a mother and a brother to evil 20 years ago. The son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta, Mr. Dante.
Well, the way I figure it, in this business a lot of your kind comes around. And if I kill each one that comes, eventually I should hit the jackpot sooner or later.
In that case, you should be used to this sort of thing.
Are you really the son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta? Didn't your daddy teach you how to use a sword?
Sword? Haha, time to go to work, guys.
It was at this moment he knew. He fucked up.
Even as a child, I had powers. There's demonic blood in me.
What strength?
You were the first one to know about my vengeance. It looks like I'm getting closer.
It seems that way, but I'm not your enemy. My name is Trish. I came here to seek your help, to put an end to the underworld.
What?
So after crashing a motorcycle through Dante's front door and proceeding to beat the absolute shit out of him, she proceeds to explain that she knows where Mundus is, and that Mundus is resurrecting on Malay Island, as well as some of his forces, and that she will take him to Malay Island, because if you don't know anything about Malay Island, it is a constantly shifting island, depending on where the most demonic energy is concentrated. And that's really all you need to know to get started with Devil May Cry. So without further ado, let's start this game, shall we?
The castle is above this cliff. Come on, let's go! Ha! So one of the first things you're going to notice upon playing Devil May Cry for the first time is the use of fixed camera angles. Much like Capcom's other very successful yet survival horror franchise, Resident Evil. And to the absolute surprise of literally nobody in the gaming space, Devil May Cry was going to be Resident Evil 4 at some point, but the directors at Capcom said that the idea was too crazy, which is ironic because you look at the real Resident Evil 4 and then you start to question what the hell they were smoking, but that's besides the point. So what got this game canned as a Resident Evil game was how bizarre it was, how out there it was, and how strange this game was going to be. So right from the get-go, you had a strange concept. You were going to be this super-powered cop, powered by the T-Virus, named Tony Redgrave, and you wouldn't just have guns in this game, you would have swords. And you would have these new kinds of enemies. Yes, you would have your traditional undead enemies, like zombies and demonic plants, but you also had more demon-based enemies, like the Riots and the Fetishes. Wow, these guys really lost hard with the demonic naming convention. But you also had spiders that were like super big, and that's not anything new for Resident Evil, that's been around since the first game. But needless to say that this game was going to be strange. There was even some unfinished designs for a Tyrant-type enemy, something like Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 or Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. Needless to say, this game was going to be weird. Like, really, really weird. And that's why they canned it. But the thing that confuses me is, when you look at the real Resident Evil 4 and how batshit insane that game is, you kinda question what the hell Capcom was smoking. Not to say that the real Resident Evil 4 is bad, it's genuinely one of my favorite games of all time, and it kicks massive amounts of ass, but still. Anyway, that's off topic. I'll save that for the Resident Evil retrospective. Anyway, that's a brief summary of what Devil May Cry, or Resident Evil May Cry, as the fans call it, was going to be. And now, after all this jamble at the beginning of the video, I'm actually gonna get around to discussing how the fucking video game feels to play. So like I said earlier, you're in a big castle hall, and fixed camera angles do play a part, but what are you supposed to do here? You're supposed to learn the controls. This is a safe space where you can figure out what moves you have available, how to move around, and how to jump, and how to shoot, and how to taunt if you're just mashing buttons like me. But what you're intended to do overall is find 45 red orbs so you can enter a door at the back of the room to progress the level. And then, from there, you meet some enemies. And this is where the game gets interesting. This is where the game goes from Resident Evil clone to badass Devil May Cry. So without a further ado, let's play the first combat encounter, shall we? Did I ever mention how much I love this intro? Because you have this quiet atmospheric section at the beginning where you're learning the controls and grabbing orbs and taking in the atmosphere of the game. And then you finally figure out what to do, and then you're like, that's suspicious, but it's probably fine. And then bang! Combat section. Shit's exploding. There's enemies all around you. It's fucking insane. I love it. And that's why I love Devil May Cry, because of the combat. Granted, the combat isn't quite as smooth as I wanted it to be in the first game, but jumping from the third game to the first game does that. I don't recommend it. But it's really, really cool, because it's so intense, because there's enemies from all directions, and you're trying to figure out what to do on the fly, and you're gonna take damage regardless, so don't at me in the comment section and be like, oh, this hoity-toity loser tooketh damage from thy petty enemy. Shut up. I want to have fun, okay? But yeah, anyway, on the subject of combat, how does the combat work in this game? Well, without a further ado. So, really, to get yourself started with the combat of Devil May Cry, you need to start where you start with every game, knowing what the buttons do. And in the case of Devil May Cry, we need to start off with the shoulder buttons, because they are arguably the second most important amount of buttons of the controller for this specific game. And what L1 does is lock on, and unlike in other games where you would just lock on and that would be that, L1 lock on is a modifier for certain moves like Stinger or High Time, both of which pack a respective punch. And your second most important button is your triangle button, or Y if you play on Xbox, which is your sword button. Square being your guns, or circle, and X being your jump button. The movement stick does what its name suggests, moves you around. Clicking in the camera stick will switch your weapon. Pushing down on the D-pad just brings up sub menus. R1 is your devil trigger, and I'll get into more of devil trigger later, but right now we'll just describe it as a boosted mode where you're doing more damage and you move faster. And that's pretty much all you really need to know for Devil May Cry's controls. So, further on, we will go now into Dante's moveset. So first off, you have Combo A, which is done by repeatedly mashing the attack button, which is just a basic 3-hit swing. It's pretty good for an initiator, but not much else. It can be useful when you're in a bind and need some extra attacks to do, but it's not really one you're going to reach for every time. So next up we have Combo B, which is done by pushing the attack button 2 times, staggering, and then mashing the attack button like a monkey. And what this attack has in terms of unique properties is the more enemies that you hit with it, the faster your style rank goes up, because the way that Devil May Cry's combat system works is it's tailored toward focusing on one enemy at a time.
but when you hit multiple enemies, the style meter kind of freaks out internally and doesn't know what to do, so it gives you a huge style bonus. So when you can, use Combo B for crowd control. It's really, really good. So after that we have Combo C, which is done by pushing the attack button 2 times, staggering for a very brief moment of time, and then mashing the attack button. And what that does is the move shown on screen. Now this is good for when you want to do something stylish, but you've already exhausted your use of Combo A and B and need to get yourself out of a pinch, and need to be stylish by varying your moves without using the aerial combat. And aside from that, this move doesn't really have much of a use except for deflecting projectiles back at bosses and back at stage hazards. It's not bad, but it's not great. Anyway, now we segue into aerial combat. So if there's anything that I can say about the aerial combat in Devil May Cry 1 is that you should not under any circumstances expect it to be anything like the aerial combat in Devil May Cry 3, 4, and 5, because that has a lot of nuance and complexity and speed to it. And if I could say anything positive about Devil May Cry 1's aerial combat, is that it does have variety and a lot of good starting points that later entries in the series would build off of from there, as you do with most sequels. We're not going to talk about that one right now. Or this. Look, they'll have their own dedicated episodes, but as far as right now is concerned, we're talking about Devil May Cry 1. So, in terms of aerial combat, you have your launcher, High Time, which is done by pushing lock on, back on the left stick, and the attack button. After that, you have a cancel, which is Helm Splitter, which is done by just pushing the attack button in the air with no bells or whistles. And later on, you get Devil Trigger, which is accessed via Sword Alistair in Mission 4, after you get this wonderful cutscene. So after that incredibly badass scene, we get access to the sword Alistair, and with Alistair we gain access to Devil Trigger, which is basically a powered up state where you hit harder and move faster. Later games would add to this, but that's all it does in this game. Anyway, what your exclusive moves for Devil Trigger consist of are Vortex, which is where you do the stinger input in the air, and since I forgot the name of this move and don't care to look it up at the moment, Lightning Strike, which is where you shoot lasers out of the palm of your hand to absolutely decimate every single enemy on the playing field. Yes, fry like your chicken brethren. Which is ironic because you do fight a bird in this game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. And before I do, let's check up on what the hell's going on in the story so far. So around Mission 4, some of Mundus's lackeys have started to recognize that you are infiltrating the castle. And after grabbing the Heart of Lions, that being a key item in Resident Evil 4 and Devil May Cry, don't think you're being sly, Capcom. I see you. You run into your first boss, that being Phantom. And then you get this lovely exchange, which, to be honest, still puts a smile on my face, as does most Devil May Cry cutscenes. So without a further ado, here's the interaction.
Surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
So, the role that Phantom provides is kind of being the first real gatekeeper of the game. Basically saying, look, if you want to continue playing Devil May Cry, you gotta get good. You have to beat Phantom. And I find that design to be intrinsically rewarding, because your first time fighting this boss, you're gonna see this screen a lot. Like a lot. But on your second playthrough, you're just gonna wreck Phantom's whole world in the most stylish and beautiful way possible, and that is what I find most rewarding about Devil May Cry. If you're persistent with your first playthrough, your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th playthrough are going to be absolutely wonderful. They're going to be wonderful romps through this amazing game that you really should play. But before I get off topic, what do Phantom's attack patterns consist of? So Phantom's first attack is an attack where he swings with both of his claws out, and if you get caught up in it, no worries, it does pretty minimal damage, unless you're an idiot like me who's playing on hard mode. His second attack consists of shooting up fire pillars from the ground, and if you get caught by these, yeah, they chain into each other. You're basically fucked if you get caught by these. Third attack consists of when he jumps up and tries to land on you. This is very easily avoidable because his shadow will appear on the ground as telegraphing, which is something I very much like. Also something that Sonic Unleashed needs to learn, but that's besides the point. His fourth and final attack consists of him shooting fireballs, which with proper timing, you can shoot right back at him, and it's actually really satisfying because it opens him up to be absolutely annihilated, and it's very intrinsically rewarding. That is, after all, the formula of Devil May Cry, being very difficult but fair. Attacks are well telegraphed, moves are made easy to utilize once you know how to do them, and it's overall just a really fun game. Now, moving on.
Okay, so I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like Devil May Cry 1 is all perfect, because quite frankly, there are some really bad and inconvenient bits of the game. And to list off a few of them, they would be Nightmare, Shadow, the water sections, and a few other enemies that we'll get into. Now, Devil May Cry 1 is also largely a very fun and action-packed game. But for minimal frustration, and to give myself more of an aneurysm than usual, I'm going to list off every way that is easiest to take down every shitty enemy in the game, and how to beat Nightmare the fastest, because we all know that Nightmare sucks. Unless we're playing DMC5. So without further ado, let's quickly discuss how to defeat every shitty enemy in this game, of which there are only a few. So first off, we have Shadow. No, not that Shadow.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
Although that Shadow is a subject we will be covering on this channel eventually. I am a Sonic fan after all. Let that sink in. Anyway, Shadow is easily taken care of by going into the fight with Devil Trigger and using Aerial Rave. That's pretty much it. Dodge his attacks and just spam Aerial Rave, although if you want to be stylish you can use Vortex as well. But if you want to play it safe, I highly recommend using the Grenade Launcher and Aerial Rave. So moving on. Okay, so if you were to ask me what the most annoying enemy in the first Devil May Cry game is, I would hands down say nobody. Simply because they're really annoying, they're really beefy, and they're really cheap. But alas,
So what are some easy strats you can do to defeat the nobodies quickly? Well, you equip the same strategy as you did with Shadow, Aerial Rave. And when Aerial Rave doesn't work, or when you're out of Devil Trigger, you can use Grenade Rolling. Grenade Rolling is tech for the first Devil May Cry game, where when you have the grenade launcher equipped, you can shoot it, obviously, but it has a really long reload animation, so you can negate that reload animation by dodge rolling. And yeah, it's a pretty viable strategy. I don't think I have footage of the grenade rolling strat, but I do have footage of the aerial rave strat. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And with an honorary fuck you to nobodies, we move on forward to the next enemy. So a little ways into the back half of the game, you're going to encounter these enemies that multiply. And since I can't remember their name, and I'm just going off of face value at this point because this video was supposed to be out 2 months ago, and I'm currently awake at 2 in the morning on a school night editing a stupid ass YouTube video. So without further ado, this is how you take care of the multipliers. Now the easiest way to take care of them is to use Aerial Rave, similar to Shadow. And when you run out of Devil Trigger, you can grenade spam. But that's somewhat of a non-viable strategy because they will multiply upon heavy damage, so you're going to want to mix in melee with grenade rolling. And that's pretty much the easiest way to take care of... Oh fuck, I just remembered their name! And that's pretty much the easiest way to take care of the plasmas. So yeah, moving on, we have... Oh dear god. Dear god, where do I even begin with this motherfucker? Okay. So, the easiest way to take care of Nightmare is to grab your gauntlets and charge punch. And there's also a secondary move that you can get sucked up into if you allow Nightmare to hit you, where you fight previous bosses with much lower health and much lower aggression. And when you pop back out of that dimension, it does a lot of damage to Nightmare. And combine those two strategies together along with Aerial Rave, and you have a pretty tolerable fight. So, moving on even further. Okay, so the easiest strat for the first-person swimming sections is simply ignore any enemies that aren't mandatory, which on your first encounter, every enemy is going to be mandatory, so just spray and pray, you know, military style. And then when you have some enemy encounters that aren't mandatory, just ignore them at all costs, because it's not really all that great. But yeah. We move on even further to finally wrapping up the narrative of this game and finally finishing this fucking video. So, where we had finished off the last portion of the narrative discussion of this game, we have finished off Phantom. Now, this isn't Phantom's last appearance. He will appear multiple times throughout the rest of the game as another boss, but all of his other encounters are pretty much exactly the same. Same attack patterns, different location, yada yada type stuff. Anyway, Phantom will appear outside of boss fights, mainly to chase you down through hallways. And what he does is, well, he chases you down through hallways. This can be a good time to implement a strategy called orb farming. Now, orb farming is when you kill Phantom in the hallway, and then after that, you save and reload. And your orbs will be saved from your previous encounter with him. And you can do this till you have the desired amount of money that you have. And that's pretty cool, although it is quite time consuming, but if you have the time, go ahead and give it a shot, considering that DMC1 is very stingy with orbs for some reason. That, compiled with the fact that I suck at the game, doesn't really give me any good hands, but you know, shit happens. Anyway, moving on even further. Moving on throughout the castle, you'll be doing missions and other bullshit pertaining to various missions of this castle, until you run into a mysterious swordman going by the name of Nello Angelo. You see, Nello Angelo is a swordsman fabled to have the same fighting style as Dante, and that is why he has the same exact moves as you. And to be honest, it's a little uncanny. Although his theme song is an absolute banger, although I can't remember the name of the song off the top of my head at the moment. Please forgive me for that. Nello Angelo is a very interesting fight and quite a mysterious character, and he adds so much to the already existing atmosphere of Devil May Cry 1, to the point where I genuinely don't think that Devil May Cry 1 would be the same game without Nello Angelo. Anyway, later down the line, you fight Nello Angelo 2 more times, and it's revealed that he's Dante's long-lost brother, Virgil. And with this, Dante gains access to both halves of the Perfect Amulet, and whilst having Alistair nearby, as well as the 2 sides of the Perfect Amulet, they combine together to form the Sword of Sparta, with a pretty badass cutscene, all things considered. Yeah, I'm just gonna give it to you straight. The Sparta is exactly the same as every single sword in this game. It's exactly the same as Alistair, the exact same as Force Edge, with the caveat that you do a little bit more damage and don't have Devil Trigger anymore. Except for the final boss, but we'll get to that. So yeah, that's pretty much Sparta in a nutshell. Anyway, moving on, we have 2 more bosses and the final portion of the narrative. So without further ado, let's carry on to that, shall we? So shortly after your second encounter with Nello Angelo, you run into a big bird called Griffin on the pirate ship the St. Elmo. Make all the memes you want, internet. I'm surely helpless to stop you. Hell, I've contributed. Anyway, if there's an analogy that I can make to the way that you approach this boss, it is that your swords and gauntlets primarily being the salad, and your guns being the salad dressing. And the way that you approach Griffin is by using your trusty salad dressing. See, rather than fighting him up close directly, you shoot him from a range, such as he shoots you from range. And so you're constantly going at each other, trying to keep just enough distance for your shot to land, but also making sure not to get too close so he doesn't hit you. And this is a very interesting way to make a boss. And it's certainly different from anybody else in the series. Let alone, they wouldn't even try this again in the series. We'll talk about it next time. Anyway, that's pretty much Griffin in a nutshell. And after your third and final encounter with Griffin, this cutscene plays, which serves to establish more of the character's motivations and establish Mundus as more of a threat. So without further ado,
Yours are definitely the powers of Sparta. Even more so. But I cannot let you live. I serve my master Mundus.
You can't fight with that wound.
Mighty is the power of Mundus. Master, grant me one last surge of power. The power to finish him. Master Mundus. Griffin, you have failed me. You are no longer worthy. What? No! Wait! No! Max, no!
Three-eyed.
You beat him. Maybe it was too easy for you.
Mundus. His heinous ways make me sick, killing even his own, like they were nothing. He's the one that took the life of my mother, my brother, Shirley. My mother used to always tell me that my father was a man who fought for the weak. He had courage and a righteous heart. In the name of my father, I will kill Mundus.
So a quick tangent about Mundus. I love the way that he's built up in this game. The way that he is built up in this game, he is so frightening and imposing. He's the first thing you see in the castle, whether you know it or not, and you're not going to know it on your first playthrough, but that statue in the main hall, that's Mundus. That's what he looks like. And then he appears throughout the game as these 3 dots in the sky that smites everything. So you don't even know how the hell you're supposed to be able to take him on. And that creates such a super uneasy feeling, combined with a little bit of a power trip, because I mean, fuck it, you're Dante, the Demon Slayer. Anyway, Mundus is such an interesting character, although not really having much characterization, because once again, it's an early PS2 game. But what characterization is there is super interesting. I also love the way his design evolves throughout the game, because in the beginning of the game, you see him as a statue. Throughout the middle of the game, you see him as 3 eyes in the sky. And then in the back half of the game, he becomes this big, almost Greek statue-looking thing for the final boss. And then, during the final showdown, he becomes nothing but thousands of greedy hands all reaching out to finally claim what's theirs, only to get smite down by Dante. But we'll get to that. First, we have to talk about... oh, hell no. So I know I already complained about Nightmare, but I'm gonna do more complaining because I feel like bitching. Nightmare breaks the philosophy of every single boss that has been established so far. Whereas every boss has had a unique way to approach them, Nightmare quite literally follows the definition of, I think I'm doing it right. The most consistent strategy I found for him is just to spam the bare knuckle attacks and kick 13 and hope that you win. Hell, this is the only fight in the game where I permit using any items, that being holy water, untouchables, and vital stars. Like, this fight is so random, and because, you know, he's just a big homunculus blob, you can't even tell what most of his attacks are, because he doesn't have a clear form, thus, you can't telegraph his attacks properly, so it's all just a bunch of bullshit. But anyway, that's pretty much Nightmare in a nutshell. After our third and final encounter with Nightmare, we learn that our former ally Trish is actually working directly for Mundus, which was established in a cutscene prior. But now that Dante knows it, we get some of the shittiest line reads in the whole game.
Dante! Dante, why did you save my life?
Because you look like my mother. Now get out of my sight. The next time we meet, it won't be like this.
Dante!
Don't come any closer, you devil! You may look like my mother, but you're nowhere close to her. You have no soul. You have the face, but you'll never have her fire!
Trust me, we'll get to the shittiest one, but not quite yet. Anyway, after it's established that Trish is, you know, a villain, or at least conspiring with the villains, Dante, the son of Sparta, marches further into hell to face off against his ultimate enemy, Mundus, the purest embodiment of evil there is. And you know your character action game? You know, the one that literally invented the genre? You know, the one that quite literally, you know, invented the genre? Guess what the final fight is? Is it a fight? Is it an amazing fight between siblings and an awesome display of duality? Is it like the coolest thing ever? Like in every other game? No, you got fucking Space Harrier in your character action game. It's fine. It's the usual fare. I'm not mad at it. It's completely bearable. Now where things really pick up is the second fight against Mundus. That has desperation to it. Basically, you have to jump up on these platforms and strike Mundus with the Sparta, and exclusively the Sparta, because in this fight, this is the only portion of the game where you get Devil Trigger with the Sparta. There's a few issues in DMC1. Anyway, so once you finally beat that boss, you get sent back into Mundus's throne room, which is where we get this cutscene.
My mother risked her life for me, and now you too. I should have saved you. I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light! This was my mother's. Now I'm giving it to you. My father's also here now. Rest in peace.
So after that brilliant display of what terrible voice acting looks like, we get another Resident Evil reference in our Devil May Cry game. That being the classic self-destruct sequence. If I can go on a quick tangent real quick. Basically, in every Resident Evil game, the finale is a self-destruct sequence because I couldn't think of anything else. And no, that's not an insult, it's quite literally a canonical thing that they couldn't think of anything else. So basically, you'll have these self-destruct sequences where you'll be escaping a mansion, an island, a city, a boat, a whole bunch of other stuff. And Devil May Cry borrows very heavily from Resident Evil 4, mainly in the way that it ends, minus the demons. So anyway, we link back up with Mundus, and we realize, damn, homie, you got like 5 billion more hands, and Mundus is all like, I'm gonna fucking kill you, and you're like, Uno reverse card? And we get this brilliant cutscene.
Mother!
Dante, use my power!
Trish!
It looks like we have a winner.
Jackpot! Goodbye. And when you do come back, give my regards to my son, will ya? Trish!
Dante. Dante.
Trish, devils never cry. These tears are a gift only humans have.
We're too late.
No, Trish, it's never too late. And we humans never give up. Are you ready?
Yes!
Let's rock. The sky is fair. It'll always be above everyone's head, no different.
Like the sky. I feel like my heart is becoming clear.
Let's not forget, though, the Underworld's evil is still alive. They will someday return.
There's no need to worry, right? Because the world has the legendary Dark Knight Dante and his sidekick. Devil never cry. Yes? Okay, great. Where's the place? We'll be right there. This one has the password. Sounds heavy.
Okay, let's get it over with in 10 minutes. Can't let a single one of those suckers live.
5 minutes.
More than enough.
So that was Devil May Cry, developed by Capcom and Team Little Devils in the year 2000 for the PlayStation 2. It's a little rough around the edges, but once you start to realize that this is the progenitor of every single character action game to ever exist, like, without Devil May Cry, you wouldn't have your Bayonettas, your Metal Gear Risings, your Ninja Gaidens, you wouldn't have any of the other DMC games, which are some of the greatest games ever made. You wouldn't have games like Transformers Devastation, which is a character action game that I recently picked up. Like, this is a genre that I love. And it's so fun to be able to go back and experience what the original first character action game was. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Devil May Cry. If you're looking for a number rating, I give it a stupendous 9.5 out of 10. The only reason I give it a 9, well, it's a little rough around the edges. But it is still a very, very good game. And if you're thinking about getting into Devil May Cry, do not skip on this entry. It's really good. So if you like the video, I hope you like and subscribe, and I understand if you don't. I mean, my content is kind of dog water, but, you know, auditorially speaking, it's quite nice, at least I hope so. But still, even if you don't stick around, I'm very glad that you watched my video to the end. And for all 63 people that are watching this video as subscribers, I'm very honored to entertain you. Until then, I'll see you next time, when we play the amazing, the bombastic, the stunningly stylish Devil May Cry 2. See you next time, guys.